Our reading today comes from Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 to 13 and 18 to 26. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, for your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the daughter is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, and he went in and took her by the hand, the girl got up, and the report of this spread through all of that district. This week, we begin what's referred to in the church year as ordinary time. It's ordinary not in the sense that it's boring or commonplace, but rather that it's ordered, arranged, or related to a series. The church year is divided nearly in half. Half of the year we have the special seasons of the church year, Advent and Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter through Pentecost. And then we get this 6 months of ordinary time. And during these 6 months this year, Matthew will guide us through Jesus's ministry. And in the other years, Luke and then Mark and John is interspersed. Just as Jesus' disciples walked along with Jesus through his ministry, we get to walk alongside and get a peek into what he was up to throughout his ministry. And as we get these peeks, we get to then decide what they mean for us as we continue forward with our ministry together. In this place where we jump into Matthew's gospel today, Jesus has already been pretty busy with his ministry. He's already called 11 of his 12 disciples, and he's already given the Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus laid out many of his most important and primary teachings. And now, Jesus starts to live them out through his actions, demonstrating to his followers that we too are to follow with our lives and not just with our beliefs. Our reading today gives us 3 little stories, maybe seemingly unrelated, but there's plenty that connects them. Matthew's called to be a disciple. A woman who was suffering for 12 years was healed, and a girl was brought back to life. In each instance, it was Jesus' action that brought about a miracle transformation. But each situation also demonstrated the power of people responding with a boldness of faith and trust in Jesus. First, Jesus calls Matthew, the final of his 12 disciples. I don't know if he was having trouble finding the final of his 12, or if he was waiting for Matthew specifically to come along to fill this final position. But finally, here is Matthew. A side note here, this makes me wonder how many people Jesus had to ask in order to get the 12 people to say yes. We hear about the 12 yeses, but certainly there had to be people who said to him, no way, right? Like, what was his rejection rate? Anyways, none of Jesus' disciples were the typical disciples of rabbis of the time. Usually in that time, students of a rabbi would be the smartest and the best of the best. They would have studied and proven themselves in school and prepared to be rabbis themselves. Instead, the people Jesus called to be his close followers, his students, were average people. Nobodies really. Lots of fishermen. Not people who we would have expected to be followers of a rabbi. But in calling Matthew to be his disciple, Jesus took it to the extreme. No one would have expected Jesus to call a tax collector to be his disciple. People hated tax collectors. The tax collectors worked for the Roman occupiers and, of course, collected taxes, which took what little profit margin people had to live life off of. But the hatred of tax collectors was even more because they were often corrupt and added a little to the total to take off for themselves. So it was scandalous for Jesus to ask Matthew to be his disciple. But that's what Jesus did, thus transforming not only Matthew's heart and mind, but also the hearts and minds of everyone who assumed that nothing good could possibly come from a tax collector. And Jesus had already made it his custom to eat with and hang out with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus had made it clear in his teachings already, and again here, that he came especially for those in need, those not highly valued by society, those on the margins. Jesus did the really hard work here of transformation, but Matthew also participated. With the boldness of faith and trust in Jesus, he got up and followed. He followed Jesus when Jesus called him. It's unclear how much Matthew knew about Jesus at this point. Perhaps he had heard a great deal, and perhaps he didn't know much. Either way, Matthew was taking a big risk in following Jesus, a risk that took trust and faith. A leader of a local synagogue then came to Jesus because his daughter had just died. The man asked Jesus to lay his hand on the girl to bring her back to life, an action that would in turn make Jesus ritually unclean. When Jesus got to the man's house, people were gathered to help the family mourn. The people showed no confidence that Jesus could bring the girl back to life, but that's what Jesus did, foreshadowing his own death and resurrection as well as our own. Jesus did the real hard work of transformation here, bringing the girl back to life, but the leader also participated. With the boldness of faith and trust in Jesus, he came to Jesus and boldly proclaimed that he believed his daughter would live if Jesus just put his hands on her. The religious leader most certainly would face ridicule and probably more serious ramifications for even talking with the rebel Jesus. So that leader, that father, took a huge risk in going to Jesus, asking for life for his daughter, a risk that took trust and faith. And that was interrupted by a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. For all of that time, she had been relegated to the margins of society because she was deemed unclean by the religious laws. She had been isolated socially, religiously, economically. She had suffered physically. And when Jesus saw her, even knowing that her touching him made him ritually unclean, he healed her. Jesus did the real hard work of transformation here by healing her. But the woman also participated. With the boldness of faith and trust in Jesus, she went to Jesus and touched his cloak, believing that he would make her well. She took a risk in doing this action that in turn made Jesus ritually unclean, but it ultimately healed her. A risk that took trust and faith in Jesus. In each of these situations, Jesus was bold and pushed the boundaries of what people expected. And the people encountering Jesus were also bold in their trust and faith in Jesus and took action on that trust and faith. God can do whatever God is going to do with or without us. None of this really requires our action. God created the whole universe on God's own. But God does choose to work through us human beings. And how much more beautiful and powerful is it when we join in and work with what God is doing? Jesus does the hard work, but we're invited to participate. We're invited and encouraged to step forward with boldness and faith. And then watch the miraculous transformation that God will do through and in us and in the world around us. So may we listen for the call and watch for Jesus's presence, and then respond with boldness of faith and trust in Jesus. Trust that Jesus is going to do the hard work because he already has and will continue to do so. And faith that Jesus will continue to transform us and transform the world around us. Thanks be to God. Amen.